some things we could talk about up front, just about programming. We've been on one recently, with many events over here. I just want to look back to last week when we had a really exciting panel, the second part of a three-part series on AI. And that panel was hosted by our very own Dave Frederick. And it was about AI and storytelling. Yeah, there he is. We had local game developers joining us for that talk. And it was really exciting. We've recorded it and we'll have it available on the website shortly. Today's our special event with Clarinda Donato. We'll get to that in just a minute. Up next, we have a WLLC spring course preview. So this is for everybody in WLLC or CLCS, TAs, faculty, everybody. If you have a digital element, if you're doing something with the digital in your course, right, you can sign up for this event and you'll have some time to talk about the course that you're running in the spring. And it falls within the registration window, obviously. So that's an exciting event. We hope to have faculty and graduate student participation in that event.
Does Blackboard count as a digital component of the class?
This is what I want to be plugging in.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, technically, yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Especially if you're doing something really fun and exciting with it. I'm sure you are. Okay, good. Confirmed. So I think we're all kind of part of the Stigma Network, but I'll just say, you know, as just to be thorough, that, you know, we focus on programming, on events kind of like this one today. But we're also trying to drive research, support pedagogy, and innovation in both research and pedagogy, and also build curriculum. And we have a minor on the way in world languages, game design, and digital humanities. We have a micro certificate for graduate students also in the works. But when you think about the intersection of events, research, pedagogy, curriculum development, all of that is going to be addressed by the talk today, and that's really exciting. It's a thrill and an honor to have Clarinda Donato with us today. She is a professor of French and Italian at California State University, Long Beach. She's a longtime innovator in those spaces, and most recently she has established a Center for Translation Studies and Intercultural Competencies, Global Competencies at CSU Long Beach. We had a inspiring and really just provocative talk this morning about programming and curriculum building, and I think the role of technology for a world languages department.
And she will be speaking to us on Wednesday.
And she's coming back. That's right. It's a good sign.
You're going to be really sick of me by the time this is over.
I was saying, it's always a good sign. You give a talk and invite you back at the end of that talk.
Right.
Your return is 2 days later.
I'm like really excited.
Yeah.
Anyway, great. There we go. Well, I want to thank you for a very warm welcome here at Fayetteville, Arkansas. I can start with a little anecdote that the first time I heard about your beautiful campus was about 25 years ago. I was on an NEH panel where the NEH used to bring us all together to Washington, D.C. to review proposals. And a writer from here, and I don't remember his name, but he was a very well-known writer. He had written 5 novels. I need to look him up, but he was on the panel. And we got to be good friends, and we wrote to each other for a long time after that. And he said, you have got to come to the University of Arkansas. You know, Fayetteville is the center of the world. This is where it's all happening. This is a great university. And so I've always had that in my mind. And I finally made it. So anyway, thank you for the very warm welcome. As Curtis said, I'm going to be talking about the use of DH tools and my own incorporation of them into my teaching. And I can tell you that it was just as daunting and challenging for me to do that as it would be for any of you, and that we as faculty members need to change, we need to update, and but we need to work together. We need to work together to establish what we think for ourselves and for our students are digital humanities goals. And that needs to come out of conversations of collaboration around new degree programs, new course offerings, because what I've noticed, it's very hard to impose new things on old material. You have to really rethink the old. The material's not old, it's just that it needs to be adapted to new forms of access and application. And at Cal State Long Beach, this opportunity in many ways was given to us through the program in translation studies. And so this was very, very important that we were able to, we got a big gift, and the donor required that we really create new programs. We had written that in our proposal, but before he gave us more money, he wanted to make sure we did it. And that forced us to really start talking to each other about what that new curriculum should look like. So, and of course, anybody working in translation studies these days knows, even if you're working in literary, which is what most universities do, but I think we need to be doing a lot of different things as well. I then looked at what do I do with literary translation and the use of digital humanities tools, and that's going to be the core of my presentation today. But first I wanted to just walk you through quickly the program that brought us there. And the goal was to establish a state-of-the-art translation studies center at a state university, not at a very expensive private university. We know that one of the best programs for translation in the country is in Monterey, but that has an $80,000 price tag. And it seemed to us a huge disconnect between masses of multilingual students with few financial resources and the incredible need for translation and interpreting. And how did we bring this was part of my argument to the donor. These programs need to be in state universities because we have the students who are multilingual and they can provide those services. And I don't go into that in this talk, but translation services, interpreting services across so many disciplines, jobs for things that are called terminologists, which are people versed in translation and digital humanities, linguists from the digital humanities, computational linguistics perspective. The number of jobs, it's off the charts. It's just growing exponentially. This week in Miami, or last weekend, just finishing, they had the American Translators Association meeting, which I went to last year. It was in LA and we made a presentation. And this year, just scrolling through the program was mind-blowing in the sense that there were so many sessions on the need for translators and interpreters. How do we train them? How do we balance the traditional translating preparation with the need for digital humanities? Because we do need both, and I think that is really important. So that was our goal, and we had a lot of assets. The reason the donor was interested was because we had all of these languages. I think you teach even more languages. But the goal was to have a program for all of our languages and to be inclusive in that way. What good is it if you just do the most commonly taught languages? I mean, that's really, again, we're talking about inclusion. we're talking about DEI, I like to quote a statement by somebody by the name of Russell Berman, who was a professor of German at Stanford University, who said, you know, people are always talking about the contact zone, but the biggest contact zone is in the language classroom. Why aren't we talking about languages when we're talking about DEI? Why aren't we talking about access to language? It's actually unbelievable to me how much language has been left out of that conversation, and we need to put it back. So these are the issues that we brought up with the donor: high demand for applied language instruction leading to employment. I want to emphasize that. And it doesn't mean that we don't teach literature anymore, but what it means is that we are giving our students tools to work in industries where their humanities background is highly valued. We talk to Netflix, we talk to people who are in the dubbing and subtitling business, and they all say, we need people to do this work who understand history, who understand the evolution of culture, because we have disastrous results when people translate who only know the languages. They need to have they need that humanities background. And these are things that we need to say to our administrators about why the humanities is so important. The administrators listen when we connect it to the ways in which we are preparing our students for jobs and for working in the 21st century. The other thing that was phenomenal about this year's American Translators Association were the number of sessions on government jobs in translation and interpretation. What's very interesting is many of the people who have been doing this work, they are all of retirement age. And our universities have not done a good job by only focusing on literary translation. We have not trained for the kinds of jobs that they need at the State Department. And so this is really also a plea for, we need to open up what we think translation studies is and how it should be taught in departments like ours. Our departments can expand to teach other translation and interpreting for medical, legal, and for business. And that's what we need to be doing, because we're the ones doing the languages, and we need to take ownership of that and not step away from it. We need to bring in faculty members who work with us to expand ourselves as educators. And what we were trying to meet was a challenge of how to catch the largest number of students early in their college careers. You've all had that experience, right, of people saying, oh, I want to major in languages now, but I'm a senior. Yeah, yes, wish you'd come around 3 years ago. And so when we created the minor in translation studies, our idea was to grab people at the beginning with courses that would lead to them thinking about majoring in language, because they could go into translation and they could actually come out multilingual. We encourage anybody doing translation to be working with 2 languages, because that's also in the industry highly desirable for people to have multiple languages, maybe at different levels of competency, but that they have 2. So I'm not going to spend much time looking at this minor. But the minor does have, right from the get-go, in the 401 class, so these are 9 units, a translation workshop where digital tools are taught. We teach an audiovisual translation tool, and we teach a CAT tool with translation memory, because the industry expects you to understand those programs no matter what kind of translating job you do. They will have their own programs that they'll want you to learn, but they want you to know the basic ways in which these CAT tools work. And we can teach those things, and we have been teaching those things thanks to the hiring of a few other people. But because of them, we've all been learning how to do it, and we're all starting to do this now in our classes. So I'm not going to go through the content of these classes in particular, but just so that you know that we have this foundational minor program. And as I said here, the 401, as I've emphasized here in red, through the use of software programs that facilitate the work of translators across numerous disciplines in the production of professional translations. And I want to underscore professional, because one of the things that we've learned is how much the students need to learn about the way the profession works. How do you price a job? How do you deliver a job? How do you proofread a job? It's a collaborative effort. We do this in an internship program we have. But again, learning the mechanics of applying your skills. These are the pieces that have been missing from our programs from the point of view of the professionalization of the students. Through translation, we are able to do that. Now, we have begun, now I'm going to start getting more into the topic of today. So we have created a graduate certificate in translation studies. It's a 1-year, 12-unit certificate. And together with this, we've been creating new courses, and all of these courses have a digital component. We also have an option in translation studies at the BA level with the linguistics department, and this has been a very positive outcome for linguistics and for ourselves, because they use all of the courses from our minor in their option, and so we get that enrollment, but then they send students at the upper division level to these courses that are also being taught in the certificate. So we are really merging and blending our areas of expertise, I think, to the great benefit of the students. So literary translation in transit, this is the course that I have created using digital tools with literary translation. Cognitive translatology and bilingualism, this is my colleague Julia Togato, who is a neuroscientist. She studies cognitive load. How do we, which is useful for all of us, how do we better study languages to make it easier on our brains? How do we network our language? How do we, she has a lab where she has been doing some fantastic work. Last year, the first cohort of students who graduated with the certificate gave incredible poster presentations of their collaborative projects applying these tools. It was very interesting. Audiovisual translation, my colleague Adria Martin Mor. He is an expert on minoritized languages. He is a speaker of Catalan, a minoritized language within Spain. Of course, he also teaches Spanish for us. He is also a speaker of Italian and of Sardo, the languages of the island of Sardinia. But he he really believes in localizing software for minoritized languages, because everybody talks about language preservation, and there's a lot of wringing of the hands about the loss of so many languages. But we're losing the languages because those languages are invisible on the web. If we don't have online dictionaries for minoritized languages, if we don't have DeepL or Google Translate for minoritized languages, those languages now become even more obsolete. So my colleague Adria is doing phenomenal work in this field. He's also working with indigenous Native American languages with one of our colleagues in the linguistics department. And so this is very exciting because this kind of inclusivity, digital inclusivity, is absolutely key to this. And then he also teaches the course on localization. This is a brand new course that he taught for the first time in the summer. It's being taught right now again. So I was interested in using, how do we see the literary text through Voyant and through there are also other tools, digital tools in literary translation. And so the premise of this is that the literary translator seeks to understand as much as possible about the source text, right? So instead of just going in, picking up a text and starting to translate it, we need to find out as much as we can about the source text, about the author, and so using digital tools in literary translation is all about that process and what can we do to understand a writer's use of language, what is it, can we quantify why a particular writer's style is so effective. How can we dissect that? And very often as literary translators, there is a very subjective aspect to being a literary translator. First of all, you usually translate things that you like, but you may have a very subjective approach to that text. There are things about it you like. There are things about it that you don't see. What I found fascinating about working with Voyant is how it makes me see aspects of the literary text that I missed because of my subjective view. Because maybe I like the female characters better than the male characters, but maybe the male characters are more, or more important, and I'm not looking at them because of my bias, right? These tools show you visually how present different characters are, how their dialogues are present, and the ways in which language is being used. So I taught this course in spring, and it was, as I'm going to say, it was very stressful. I had students from Chinese, French, German, Japanese, Russian, and Spanish, and worked with colleagues, other translators and interpreters to help me with the languages that I don't work with. And this was very, very important, especially for Chinese, which is one of my examples here. So we have two courses on literary translation, a more traditional course, which I also teach, I've been teaching for a long time, on the theory and practice of literary translation, very important course, but now we've added the literary translation in transit using the digital tools. And here I'm just sort of comparing the Translation Studies Reader by Lawrence Venuti. A new edition has come out, which is wonderful, and I want to applaud Lawrence Venuti for including in his new edition theories of translation that are non-Western. This has been another huge problem, that we're only working with, Western theories of translation. Why? Because nobody had translated for us the Chinese theories of translation, or the Russian theories of translation, or the Arabic theories of translation. And as I said, I applaud Lawrence Venuti for making the theory and practice of and his reader more inclusive. There's a lot more to be done there, but we really need to be looking at a much broader picture of what theory and practice of translation is. And so you see here, I have some of the essays that appear in the Translation Studies Reader, and these are new ones, the Chinese ones, Lin Zhu, Daoan, and I'm very excited because I'm teaching that course in the spring with the new edition of the book, but I'm also trying to think of, can I start putting some digital translation things into that course already? I think creating a bridge between these two courses will be very important. The book that you see there, Using Computers in the Translation of Literary Style, has been absolutely game-changing. Finding this textbook and having a textbook to follow with the students was so useful in this class. And so you can see we actually read a different variety of people, and we talked about things like close distant reading, which we'll talk a little bit more about, text visualization. We read Anthony Pym, we read Franco Moretti on close distant reading, we read Sin-Wai Chan, we talked about corpus linguistics, Warren Weaver, Andrew Booth, Mona Baker, and we looked at all of these different kinds of interfaces, obviously not able to work with all of them, but we certainly got our feet wet. Now, the course consists of two interrelated parts: Introduction to the Applications of Technology and Literary Translation, following what was in the book. So I don't think I could have, let me say that I don't think I could have taught this class without this book. And it's really exciting to know that these books exist. If you're interested in understanding a summary of the book, he has an article where he sort of summarizes his whole approach. And then number two, the students worked on a translation project coordinated with me. They had to write a translator's preface and commentary on how the computer tools helped them make the best choices in their translation. So they were not machine translating, but they were using these tools to analyze the text. Although some of the students at the end did do a machine translation of their texts weren't very long. We're looking at 10 pages, right? And then they critiqued the machine translation. They ended up liking their own translations much better. But I think what's interesting here is you can see how they're working with language. So comparing their own translation with a machine translation is also a wonderful tool of advanced language acquisition. They're looking at the different choices of vocabulary made by the machine as opposed to what they did. And they're seeing why they themselves, as a human being that had used the tools to analyze the text, were much better positioned to make better choices about what, how the translation should have come out. Asking them to reflect on the use of that, and I have some of the examples in my presentation. And, but I also think that you might be wondering, why would a professor of translation, of literature and literary translation, begin teaching digital competencies and digital tools and creating a new class? And this very much had to do with the unavoidable, as a reader of the Chronicle for Higher Education. I don't know, in California, this publication hits my inbox at about 2 a.m. and I'm a night owl and I'm usually up, and I start reading it and then I go to bed. I can't sleep because I'm too depressed by what I read, right? But one of the things that comes up a lot is what are we supposed to be doing with digital competencies? And I recommend to any of you, it's worth a subscription because it will immediately show you how much this is being discussed. It's very easy as a faculty member to kind of silo yourself, teach that same syllabus over and over again. When you start reading the Chronicle every night at 2 a.m., you start to think about, I better be doing something different here. But one of the things that came out of this was a survey on the student view on digital competencies, about digital competencies as a range of practices and knowledge, including basic computer skills, online content creation, information analysis, data analytics, and coding. And the students had a lot to say. 8 in 10 say that digital skills should be a bigger part of the college curriculum. We need to figure out how to make that a bigger part. That's our job as faculty members, to make the digital component a bigger part of what we do. The students, 8 in 10 say teaching such skills will attract students to college. I absolutely believe that is true. They want this knowledge. And as an aside here, what we've been discovering, and what I did discover to some extent teaching this course, is that we think our students are digital natives. That's not necessarily true. Many of the students are used to, they want to click on something and have it appear. I think that's the TikTok, Snapchat version. But very often they don't understand the architecture of Word documents in a computer. Like, they'll come and go, I can't find this document in my computer. And I go, well, show me how you have your Word files set up. And they're like, what do you mean? And they don't have any architecture for it. And I'm realizing that there's like this big gap between, the generations, the last 2 generations, that maybe they didn't have to do those things. They're used to this immediacy, but they don't think of how to find things or how to organize things or how to structure things. And so these are kind of some quote-unquote old school tools, but if you don't put those together with the digital things, you'll be lost. And so the students, we know those things, and they need help with that. Many of my colleagues have talked about bringing the students to the library. They don't know how to find things in the catalog, in the library catalog, because they don't know how to search for things. And so these are all skills that I consider these part of digital humanities, how to find things. It'll be really strange. You probably all have this. They'll say, okay, bring me, if you're writing this paper, bring me 5 sources, and they'll come in and go, I couldn't find anything. And then I'll just, in 2 or 3 minutes, I'll show them, and they're like, oh, I never thought of looking for that there, or thinking of, so there's a lot to be done. And we possess a lot of that knowledge, but we need to be packaging it differently for them and learning ourselves how to package it differently and how to become conversant with them in a shared space of content and digital. 9 in 10 say college is where they expect to acquire the skills that the workplace increasingly demands. And then 5 in 10 say the skills will make them better prepared for the job market. So I would love to understand why that drops down to 5 in 10. Maybe it's because they're not getting the skills yet at the university, and that would change once they are. So I believe that the challenge is, how do we embed these skills into the traditional courses we teach? How can digital tools and digital humanities perspectives prompt new knowledge while teaching and reinforcing previously learned content, right? So we really are creating new knowledge when we start to work with sources, with digital sources and digital applications, because knowledge, when we start to visualize knowledge, we start to see connections that we didn't see before. And this is really where I see the power of this from the research perspective from all of us really comes out. There are many things that stay the same in a literary translation course. The students need to know the languages and literatures. In terms of language knowledge, they need to have a high level of language, and that doesn't change. Doing the digital things isn't going to help you if you don't know the languages, right? And in terms of literature, they should know literary genre, basic literary terminology, and something about literary history. Otherwise, they don't know what they're doing. They're not able to do the things that they need. And they need an appreciation for style. Style is important because it focuses not on just what is said and how it's said, and style of a source text, I'm dropping down here to what I've bolded, will have an important bearing on the shape of the target text. So style is one of the things that the digital tools really allow us to do, is look at style. Another difference is that the class is completely flipped. So we began with a set of research questions, once we've chosen the text to translate, the students are thinking about what digital tools will allow them to see these stylistic differences and features that make it unique, and how do the tools work together. So there are multiple tools, and I'm still learning many of these. I will tell you, and I will, what do I need to know before I begin translating? That's the goal of the class. I can tell you that I brought an expert in digital humanities and translation to campus, and I have a slide about her, and she really talked about so many other programs and how useful they can be. So I just wanted to say that I'm kind of presenting the tip of the iceberg, but there's so much more. But what's comforting is that she started where we all started. She started with a PhD in literature. Great. And she started to want to do work with massive amounts of literary data, and this is what she did. So the terminology, close reading with corpus linguistics and text visualization tools, and techniques in the process of literary translation, close and distant reading, and then of course computer-aided translation and machine translation. Had to learn to work with all of these acronyms, which people doing this, they throw them around and I'm like, wait a minute, wait, let me go back. What is that acronym again? I always ask when I don't remember, what is that acronym again? Can you tell me? Franco Moretti coined the term distant reading to refer to the process of understanding literature not by studying particular texts, but by aggregating and analyzing massive amounts of data. And the concept has been at the center of data conversations in the humanities ever since. But close reading, which we've all been trained in, right, relies on the analysis, of a single literary text. Super important. We want close reading techniques, but we want to put them together with distant reading techniques. Now, I'm going to move through these a little bit more quickly here, but if you just look at what I've highlighted, the identifying of possible solutions to translation problems, something that Pim talks about. This is from a very important work of his, the generative side of the cognitive processes. If we look at literary style as is fundamentally patterns of language use, this is what digital tools do really well. They identify patterns. I want to know those patterns before I start translating. And pattern is repetition. This is what digital tools do really well. But we, the human beings, are the ones figuring out how to use these tools, right? And I can't emphasize that enough. Very often repetition is transient. We don't realize it when we're just reading something quickly or when we're in a conversational exchange. And it's often not noticed. the digital tools allow us to notice it in a text. I'm going to look here at my point number 3 that I've highlighted. The more stylistic information a translator has at their disposal, the greater the likelihood that they will be able to understand how the text has created its effects and how to attempt to recreate them. And by the way, this is useful. If you're translating somebody's speech, don't you want to have that style? What it is that is so, you know, convincing about a certain orator's style. You want to be able to pick that up in your translation of their speech. So I see these tools as applicable to all aspects of translation. Again, here, close reading retains the ability to read the source text without dissolving its structure. Distant reading does the exact opposite. So we're working with these tools in synergy. I'm going to go ahead here so I can get to some of the samples, right?
As you move to the samples, I just wanted to, a quick note on logistics. We have catering coming around 1 o'clock, and we can think about, you know, around 1 opening up to a Q&A,
Great.
or maybe through the examples that could be kind of interactive.
That's great. Yeah, that'll give us, that's about giving me another, to start going through the examples, that gives me about another 12 minutes, and you can stop me anytime, but then from 1 on, we can just eat and talk.
That'd be great.
How's that? Or talk, I'll talk and you eat. And then I'll eat. Don't worry, I'll eat. But that's, yeah. What we did here is we wanted to, each student prepared a corpus. We want to train the CAT tool, right, for your particular translation. And so I wanted the students to think about what kinds of corpora, what kinds of knowledge, language knowledge would they need in order to work with, these I assigned to them. I put them in teams. And so the Japanese did a text from the year 1000, The Tale of Genji. The Russian, I had 2 students from Japanese who worked on this. The Russians did Father and Sons, or Fathers and Children, in the new translation of Turgenev. I had the Russian and the German student work together. French, they looked at a text by the African writer Alain Mabankou, Memoir du Porc Épic. Spanish, it was, we looked at Elena Garro, who the students in Spanish were shocked that they didn't know who she was. She was the wife of Octavio Paz. So they're like, how come we're only reading this male author and she's just as important and we don't even know who she is? So that was another thing that kind of jumped out at them. We looked at Los Recuerdos del Porvenir. Also in Spanish, we looked at La Muerte de Artemio Cruz, the death of Artemio Cruz, Carlos Fuentes. What did this do? What do you need to know about history? What do you need to know about Mexican history? What do you need to know about colonialism? So they started identifying the kinds of corpora that they would like to work with. And then we had a majority of students from Spanish. We looked at Federico Garcia Lorca's The House of Bernarda Alba. And many interesting things came out of all of these. Now, this was some of the corpora that the 2 students in French wanted to look at for working with African writer Mabankou. They looked at different monolingual corpora. So what they discovered about Mabankou is that he was heavily influenced by La Fontaine and the animal tales, right? And so it was very interesting. They assembled corpora from the literary French tradition, but also from African proverbs. So this was absolutely fascinating, the way in which they needed to deal with colonial traditional colonial and post-colonial sources. And it really made them aware of how all of those kinds of language came together in Mabanku's writing. They also discovered that he was somebody who liked Edgar Allan Poe, Ernest Hemingway, and other writers that they wouldn't have necessarily thought about. And they started looking at those as well. In terms of looking at fathers and children, these are as they studied the biography of Turgenev and looked at what he was reading and thinking about, that's how they started putting together this corpora, and much of it was very politically oriented. They wanted to also look at magazines that were being read at the time that he was writing this novel. They also used corpora, about 220,000 words, 30,000 proverbs. Many of these are online tools that they were able to find and bring into their corpora that they were creating for their own translation. So they all became aware of how many things are already out there, but how many things, if they had a list of desiderata, that they would like to have. Here's with the death of Artemio Cruz. Again, you're looking at the Mexican Revolution, institutional revolutionary party, a knowledge of these political events and the language surrounding them became incredibly important. What's fascinating to me is, like, you know, have you ever, like, if I told them, go out and read the first 2 chapters of The Death of Artemio Cruz, they went, Here, they were jumping in because now they were creating for themselves their own context of why he wrote this book in the first place and what they were going to have to know to translate it. Again, his politics, how important Orson Welles was for him in Citizen Kane, and for the structure and tone of the novel. What they end up discovering is the transnational aspect of these writers. They're not just confined in their little literary tradition. They are reading widely, and they're drawing these things in. And this is where the students became aware of the need to really look beyond the transnational aspect of translation studies and of what we do. The same with the Corpora por los Recuerdos del Porvenir of Elena Garro. There was a lot of, there were similarities because Fuentes, Paz, and Garro were from the same time. But with her, you're also looking at jargon and regional languages of Guerrero, Mexico slang. So now they're starting to be, oh, is this person a regional writer? Or is the book about a region where I need to be aware of that regional slang and language? So they became, they're thinking about all these things before they're doing their translation. Right? Again, the Mexican Revolution, very important for working with her. These are pieces, these are the slides the students put together, a few of them. And then, of course, Garcia Lorca, this one I already showed, but The House of Bernarda Alba by Garcia Lorca. And here, one of the interesting things was the student who had read the book and ran it through, you know, the voyant, and said, I never paid attention to the role of the servant in this book. The servant, now I'm realizing by visualizing the number of interchanges, the servant is the center And I never realized it before. And that's where these kinds of visualizations, the students themselves changed their ideas about what was important in books that they had maybe already read. Again here, but these are the kinds of things that from the book that we were talking about, the digital, the use of digital tools, these are some of the things that they're analyzing: the narratological, lexical, grammatical, context and cohesion. You're able to do all of this with those tools. I want to get to, this was one of the best projects, and this was by a student in our certificate program who translated Snowstorm by Bruna Dantas Lobato into Chinese. This is a short story that appeared in the New Yorker, and it had it had layering because the Bruna Dantas Lobato is from Argentina, and so there was Argentine culture, but in a text in English. And so Dana Zhang, the student who did this translation, found herself also having to think about that. This is what she did with Voyant. So she took the source text. This is her human translation, and this is the machine translation. And she starts to talk, she analyzes the differences between the choices, right? And here we were, she put this together, it was wonderful. And then we had it looked at by a Chinese interpreter who pointed out a few other things from his experience. But you can see how she's like, no, the verb choice, you know, the conjugation, full of feeling. Some of this is missing from there. She's talking about modifying the translation according to content. Anyway, this is, here she tells the machine translation, I like the word you chose. So seeing that maybe that was better. But again, you see the rich language environment and how collaborative with corpora and with what the machine translation can make available to you, this became. Here she's questioning some things. Don't go out late at night, and she's thinking about, from Chinese culture, how would I talk about this, about the curfew of somebody? And in fact she had a conversation about this with the Chinese interpreter. So she looked here at the pros and cons. Of course, machine translation was quick. Human translation was time-consuming. Machine translation had, you know, good word choice, but human translation need research to check. The machine translation was word by word. The human translation is not doing that word for word. It was really able to go much more deeply, as she says here. The figurative language didn't make sense, but in the you being a human being, the much better translation for figurative language, and that she found the machine translation was emotionless, not localized. Whereas what she was able to do was to bring the emotion of the text into the translation and understood the culture for both source and target text, that she could make decisions that maintained, right, the cultural importance. So here we're looking at what some of these things looked like using Voyant. This was for a sample, but she also did a critique of Chinese with Voyant. She said that she thought for Chinese language recognition, Voyant needed improvement, that the cloud analysis generated some strange characters. The Russian student found the same thing, where for commonly taught languages, it worked much better. This was the value of having all of the students in the same class, because they were able to make comparisons across languages that wouldn't have come out of a class only taught on French or Spanish translation with the digital tools, right? So we've talked about this. You create a corpus, you upload it, and then you run the tool, and it will find many of the things that we were talking about, the number of words per line, the ways in which words are occur in the text, but for all of the words in the text. And here I just wanted to mention this particular translation of a novella by Christa Wolf that had never been translated before, Moscow. And here the translator, she was very surprised, because when she read the text, she had a certain take on it. But when she saw the word cloud, she said, wow, I never thought of Vera as being so important. But look at the importance. I kind of overlooked that. And it forced her to go back and rethink or reread also the text that she was preparing to translate. And here she's kind of, mapping, looking at the way in which Vera appears throughout the novella. Again, the visualization allowed her to do a much better translation, and my German colleague said that she did a fantastic translation. He's the one who checked it, that he was very impressed with her translation of the text, and she said in her analysis that working with this tool gave her the ability to translate much more astutely. So here you're looking, this is the word cloud. Again, the high frequency words, mom, said, room, the high frequency words in in English, in the source text, there was also the word dark. And so, again, this allowed her to think about, maybe I missed something if I haven't, maybe I needed to incorporate the notion of darkness more in my translation, because that was a major piece in the English language text. Maybe I need to think about my source text a little more. The bubble features show a visual representation of how often relevant terms appear in the text. Again, this was just something I found fascinating, that a student found these so interesting that she ran Kafka's Metamorphosis through Voyant, because she wanted to understand why she liked the book so much. And I thought that was great. How often you get a student thinking about, well, let me go back and reread something I read once and think about it from this point of view. Sketch Engine is another one of these tools. It is more powerful. The students, so for this you need a license. We had a free license for 1 month. The students made a lot of comments about, especially one in particular, using Sketch Engine. This was a comparison between Voyant and Sketch Engine. The students really got into, I made them work a lot with these two so they could understand the different features and how they compared and contrasted. I really hope to be able to take a course in Sketch Engine. It's much more complex this summer, and to learn it much more in depth. But again, you can see here they're talking about their experience, and again, they're heavily involved in language when they're talking about these digital tools, right? Here are the word lists generated by Sketch Engine. You can become, you can be a little more intense with that. Sketch Engine's frequencies and adjectives in Romance languages. This was a very interesting analysis that came out of something out of the textbook, and allowed the students to think about about gender issues, about language, about adjectives, etc. I wanted to look at the Russian project very briefly. This student compared Voyant and Sketch Engine, and he found Sketch Engine much better for Russian. It allows you to gain lots of insight about the language you select. You choose the language. It offers you multiple tools that allow you to see patterns and relationships between words in the language you are working with. His favorite was the Ngram tool, which allowed you to see a list of multi-word phrases that appear frequently, and to filter a range between 2 and 6 word phrases. For Russian, he found that the 2 to 4 word phrase was the most useful. So this is where Sketch Engine can allow you to do more than you can do with Voyant, and he found that super useful for his translation. And then it pulls the occurrence of these phrases from the corpus and lists them from the most frequently used to the least frequently used. And again, here he's doing this comparison work, and this was a student who only had a 3rd year knowledge of Russian. He worked with our Russian faculty member, but the Russian faculty member also told me he was really impressed with the translation that he did. The Russian professor helped him correct it, but also the kinds of insights he had gained into the text from working with Sketch Engine and Voyant. And again, I believe that these translations were much better because of the use of these, right? And at the end here, he wrote a lot, and he said it would not be a bad idea to use them in tandem, right? We get something different from every tool, and I think that this is highly valuable. So the takeaways, and I'm coming to the end here, the project-based nature of the class keeps students moving between content and process. They learn through problem solving from the beginning. What is my research question has given them the impetus to achieve. Emphasis on skill building, not grade seeking. The grades here, everybody who performed these tasks, and I have to tell you, they did them willingly with excitement, got the highest grade. They all did really well because, again, they were learning to apply and analyze. They were working with different languages, and it was a very positive experience. And then, of course, we are learning together. I often asked for their help. Some of them got way ahead of me in the use of the tools, and I would invite them up to, they'd come to class with, I ran this little experiment, let me show this to the class. So exciting that was. My mindset was very different. Planning was done organically, and I did invite several guest lecturers to the class. A person who came and talked about the German translation of a French text and a correspondence network. That would be another whole topic of how to use digital tools on correspondence networks. I can't wait to do this again. I will be doing it in the fall, a year from now. And before I do it again, I will have taken a course myself on Sketch Engine. I was surprised at how quickly I learned. Once I got over the imposter syndrome of it all, I actually was able to progress very nicely. Now, what I wanted to do here very quickly is just show you, oh, well, this is my center. That's our president and our dean in front of it. This is the inside of one of our simultaneous translation booths that is still being set up, and this is our new conference room. But this scholar, Diana Roig Sanz, she gave me so many of my ideas. She came and gave 2 guest lectures on our campus to the students, and her research deals with cultural and global literary history, the sociology of translation from a digital humanities approach. She has received massive amounts of funding, and she is a research scholar at the Universitat Oberta de Catalunya, where she coordinates global literary studies, the Global Literary Studies Research Lab. And I will stop here. I'm happy to.
Okay, so we have time for questions, and as questions come in, folks can also kind of filter to the back of the room and grab lunch so they can enjoy lunch while we have Q&A. But I'll open it up now. Yeah, all of them.
I came in late, and I'm not sure if you've talked about it at all. I know you don't have Arabic at your university, but
We do.
You do? Okay.
Yes.
Is there any input in how Arabic does with some of these tools that you were talking about?
I didn't have any students from Arabic. I imagine, but I hope that in the next time I teach it, I will. Our Arabic program, we only have a 2-year program, hoping to grow it. I believe that Arabic is probably something like what the Chinese student found, that there was need for improvement of the interface. I'm speculating that that's the case.
Is the Wayant thing, is that free to use, or you have?
Wayant is completely free. You can actually try it.
Try it out. Yeah.
Try it out. Sketch Engine is not, so they, but they do make available a 1-month sort of simplified version of it. You don't get all the bells and whistles. That was fine for us because that was about all we could accommodate. But I hope that after I do the course on Sketch Engine, I will be able to do more with it because I'll be more knowledgeable. But I recommend that you try with the Arabic. It's really cool. You'll be surprised at how you just feed in a text and it'll come up and you'll be able to see how well it works. So I imagine we're somewhere where we are for the Mandarin, but it still was very useful, right? She was still able to glean a great deal of information and to make these comparisons.
I think that's really such a valuable thing, to be able to compare, especially when it doesn't do such a great job. It makes you feel a little better about, your work as a translator, because, for years and decades and centuries, they've been trying to come up with machines that can translate better than humans and faster, and they're getting better and better at it, but there's always going to be a limit, and I'm really interested in just thinking about where machines and humans differ, and the idea of literary translation in particular is just the perfect
literary translation is the perfect thing, because again, and I think that the emotion, what were the things that were the problem with that machine? It missed all the cultural nuances, it missed the emotion, it missed the, so yes, I think for literary translation, again, using the tools to better analyze the text but not to translate it, you can make a real case for that. Yeah, I completely agree. But I'm curious, try it out, let me know what happens.
I will.
In the context of DH, just critiquing the tool itself was a really always valuable lesson for students. They learn a lot about, thinking about these tools not as a black box that operates perfectly, but they find all those faults, especially if they have that expertise to kind of put them over the edge. We look at Voyant in my DH course, and having different language folks with different areas of focus, different expertise across languages was really helpful to point out, like, this works really well for Spanish, but in that case it was Mandarin, and it was poor actually in comparison to the other.
Right.
Yeah, really, really helpful. Another question. Ryan,
Another question or comment?
I was curious just about, you were talking in some of those earlier examples about these corpora that just seem massive. So how did you well, like with the first crew, I think we're working with the text in French by an African author. So they're pulling from different languages, and they're pulling from these massive, like, encyclopedias. How did they manage all that information? How did that actually, what did that look like when it came to the act of translation?
So that was, that part of the class, that was only, it was like the wish list of the corpora that they would like to have. So when but they didn't actually use that corpora for then using Sketch Engine or Voyant.
Yes.
But they put together a wish list of the things that they would want. What the author of the book that I used, Udale Explains, is for he translates, he's a specialist on a Bolivian writer. He translates his work into English. And he has assembled massive corpora to pull from, where he can search, for example, the meaning of a word, and he can see all of the places and the ways that word comes up in newspapers, in novels that have been digitized, in travel logs. And especially because he says if you don't, the Bolivian, if you're localizing this, you need to have an understanding. And he's able to then make determinations based on Bolivian Spanish by looking at all of these different examples of that word used in a particular context. So that's where the corpora are super useful. You get to see the words or the engram, right?
Yeah.
The 4 or 5 or 6 word sequence as they appear in other texts, and that allows you to make some really important discoveries. In his book, Udale gives a couple of examples where he was completely stumped, and how using the corpora in that way allowed him to arrive at obscure meanings of words. So they're really empowering tools for you as the translator. And they definitely show areas where a machine translation would get it completely wrong. Completely wrong. So that the corpora, and so if you're working, especially if you're working in a certain area, you're able to assemble these corpora. And if you're constantly translating novels of, 19th century French, for example, you would have your corpora of 19th century French, and you can tell, well, when did Victor Hugo use this way? When did this rich context, the ability to look at words in context in different time periods, that is extremely valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. I think at this point you've given us 3 hours of your time.
That's okay.
It's only lunch, so maybe we thank Clarinda one more time.
I can show you one more thing.
Sure.
So this is my new research project, Navigating America in Translation, a digital humanities analysis of the representation of the content in 18th century encyclopedias. And here I'm looking at this, a Swiss encyclopedist who wrote in French, the history of the New World offers no more singular event in the eyes of the philosophe than the discovery of the new continent. So much ink was spilled on this new continent in so many languages, and there's adaptations and translations. Here I'm working with these the digital editions of the encyclopedias, right? The Artful, Encre, this is another one. This is how I got interested in digital humanities. This is my PhD dissertation you're looking at right here, online, a comparative database index of the Encyclopédie and the Encyclopédie de Verdun. It's at this website, and this is how I used my own index to sort out all of the articles that mention America in their titles or subtitles. And here I'm able to, so, I mean, the tool is just, it's maintained me through my whole career in many ways. I keep using it to write articles. It's 75,000 articles. How do you work with insight? This is, the digital humanities have made the study of compilations possible, because now that they're digitized, we can really navigate them. Whereas before we used to say, oh, you know, there's one article about this. Well, one article about religion, there's 20,000 articles about religion. How are we really going to talk about these things accurately? This is where the quantification becomes incredibly important. So anyway, this is, I was telling, we need to think big. So I'm using close distant reading in my analysis of encyclopedia, 18th century encyclopedia articles, in the same way that our friend here, Franco Moretti, has done for novels. So we'll end with the image of Franco Moretti. Maybe he's the father of us all in all of this.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
We can all grab lunch, and if you want to continue the conversation, we can.